You're listening to The Grind, well-caffeinated conversations with disc golfers who are passionate about improving their games and helping others to do the same. Welcome to episode 3 of The Grind, a disc golf podcast. I'm Josiah, and with me, my good buddy David. We're going to talk some disc golf. This week, we are going to be reviewing the Axiom Crave. We're going to talk about, hey, how do you handle when your round starts off poorly? And we're going to get a pro tip from a world champion and 3-time major champion. But first, David, as always, got to ask, what are you sipping on and how was your week?
I'm sipping on Columbia, I think it's called The Grind. It's Vanessa Van Dyken's special brew from Birdie Fuel.
That's right.
Man, it's as classic of a cup as it comes. It's maybe roasted a little bit darker than I usually like. I'm usually a light roast fanatic. This kind of sits in the medium range, but man, I'm getting kind of that nutty cocoa taste, what got you into coffee to begin with. It doesn't really have the bitterness going on. It's nice and smooth. I think this is a cup that if you had at Thanksgiving, Christmas with the family, you'd be perfectly content in enjoying a cup with the family. It's going to please everybody, offend nobody for the most part.
Yeah, it's smooth and approachable. I feel like somebody who likes a darker roast won't be offended by it, and somebody who likes a lighter roast is still going to be able to enjoy it. It's just that classic cup. I think sometimes when you have a very easy to drink coffee, you can sometimes, you don't get as much from it the first time drinking it, but I feel like this is a coffee you could have every morning and not be bothered by it. Where I feel like some really light roasts, I almost feel like it's more fun as an experience than it is as like a day-to-day habit.
I'm right with you there on that. A lot of within the industry right now, a lot of the more popular ones are the more wild cups, and we often begin to neglect the more classic cups that, really what got us into coffee to begin with.
Yeah, that Guji the last couple weeks is kind of the direct opposite of this. Like, just kind of wild and fun, and it makes you pay attention, but maybe not something I would have every morning. Well, that one's really good, so I might be tempted, but this cup is delicious. And big thanks to Vanessa and Birdie Fuel. We actually have another bag of this coming. I didn't quite realize this, but Vanessa was kind enough, unprompted. She sent the pro tip, and then she mailed us 2 bags of coffee, and then Birdie Fuel sending us 3. So we're going to have a lot of coffees to check out. So big thanks to Vanessa and Birdie Fuel. You can find The Grind as well as a bunch of other coffees at birdiefuelcoffee.com. Anyway, David, how was your disc golf week?
I got to play a lot of disc golf this week, so it was pretty great. And on top of that, my arm is feeling fantastic. I think I threw every single day, and still today, surprisingly, I think the adjustments I made to my form the prior week with my backhand is leaving me pain-free, which I think that's like the thing that I'm most stoked about right now is that, because I would love to be able to play every day pain-free. That sounds pretty fantastic. But let's see, we started off playing on Saturday. We got a big group out on Saturday. I think there's like 8 of us out there.
Yeah, we played Palisade again, which is kind of a little bit further away, 20 minutes from us, which is not bad at all.
Yeah, it was a fun round, but a hard round. I think that the previous, we played Palisade 2 weeks ago, and I think my best round I ever had. And then this was probably one of my worst rounds I've had in the past year at least. I ended up going, I think, +7. OB
Did
killed.
you really? I didn't know it got that bad. You were fine the front 9, right?
I had a birdie putt on hole 1, and it turned into a bogey because I had that crazy roll away off the basket. So that was kind of the start of my round. Frustrating, and I felt like I was able to walk away from it and just laugh at it. But definitely kind of I think I was around even or +1 by the end of 9. So it hadn't gotten bad yet. But missing Mandos at the end, and then going OB, losing one of my favorite discs into the water. So it ended up being a little bit of a rough round. And I think my putting was okay, but it was not exactly where I wanted it. And part of that was due to the wind, but it was fun to pick up on some adjustments too in the wind.
I feel like Palisade is one where the first 9 holes really favor the forehand. And then, the back 9 or back 10, it's the 19-hole course. it's kind of 50-50, but there's a few placement shots you have to hit backhand, and then a few that would be a little bit awkward to throw forehand, including the one you threw it into the river. It's probably a better forehand line, but if you soft it, you're going to lose a disc.
Yeah, there's definitely you have to commit to going backhand on. There's at least 4 holes on the back 9 it's a backhanded shot.
And you're working on your backhand form, so to me it makes sense that you would, give up some strokes. That's just part of it.
There's one hole that's frustrating to me right now because I'm curious now that I feel like I have a little bit more. What we talked about on the second cup, one of the adjustments I made with my hand grip that's given me a little bit better control. I'm curious with that adjustment. There's one particular hole that it's a really early gap that you have to hit, and it's fairly narrow. If you get it through, it's pretty open all the way down. You just have to keep it right. My typical play is take my zone, pitch it through the gap, and then pitch my zone up to the pin. It's about a 360, 370 foot hole.
I think in its current position, it's over 400 though, because it's in the deep position. Okay. If you're talking about what is it, 13 or 14, 13?
Yep. And so that's my current play. And obviously it gives me a good chance at a par, but I mean, that's a risk. I mean, taking your upshot being 200 to 250 feet, that there's definitely the chance of not being exactly where you want for a putt, just a tap in. I'm curious being able to go back and see if I can actually commit to going for the gap. I think also one of my weaknesses is not having more understable discs in my bag because I rely on overstable discs so much.
Well, to be fair, most of our courses, if you have a flat to hyzer backhand and a flat to hyzer forehand that are solid, it's very rare that you're going to need the disc to do more than one of those things. So I do think that, and we have a lot of wind, so I think it does make sense that most of your discs are straight to overstable, just naturally based on the courses we play for the most part.
Yeah, so I'm curious about, that's one hole in particular I've been thinking about.
Well, that hole in particular, I think the one thing about it is that it slopes right to left, and left is OB in a kind of a ditch creek. So my theory on that one, I threw a buzz on it because I can't reach it right now very easily. And I think that if you soft a backhand driver, you're going to go OB unless you catch a lucky stump or tree or something like that. So I don't know. I'd love to try on a second shot to get like something that's got some turn to go over. It's got OB left and right, but to go over the sidewalk OB right and then fade towards the basket. But I think in a tournament, I'm probably going to throw a buzz. I don't know that would change my play that much, even if I could reach it.
Yeah, for sure. But apart from Palisade, because I'd try to get that out of my memory, I got to play Watson, I think, 4 times this week. Yeah, I played.
I'm not jealous at all.
Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, and Friday. And I kind of averaged around -7 around there. I think my best score was around -10, -11. My lowest score was -5. And there was variations of wind. I think my -5 score was a little windy that day. I feel like I got a little practice in the wind this week because there was a couple of rounds that it was around 15 miles an hour with, there wasn't a whole lot of gusts, but it maybe maxed out every once in a while at 20 miles an hour. And for the first time, so normally when I'm playing in the wind in a tournament, my initial instinct is to just grab my most overstable disc, throw it as hard as I can into the headwind, whatever it might be, and just hope for the best. I previously in years past have not put a whole lot of thought into it other than I know overstable would give me the best chance. But this is one of the first times that I actually slowed myself down because I was playing by myself and sitting, throwing some little grass up and watching where the wind's going and adjusting whether it's a better forehanded shot, a better backhanded shot of how it's going to handle the wind. And I felt like those little adjustments made a significant impact for me. And I think part of that's mental, but then also part of that is, basic physics. And learning that side of the game, I think, is something that is hard because when you're out there playing with your friends, you just want to get up there and throw and have fun and not think about what you're doing. I think it is easier to do that when you're by yourself. I hope that when that translates to a round, that I can slow myself down and think about what the wind is doing and how I can adjust and whatnot. Even I think I told you I made a jump putt from like 66 feet or something, somewhere in the 60-foot range in the wind. I read the wind and just let the wind kind of carry it into the basket. And I was so stoked about that.
Yeah, that does make you feel good for sure.
So when you can actually think about what the disc is going to do and then it does it was exciting for me.
Just to go back to what you were saying about, a wind read or even like just taking the time. I think the one thing that really hurt me, Palisade, was the very first hole we played through a group that was rounding the corner that had like 27 people. And then we had a bigger group than usual with like 7 or 8. And I think that to me, that first throw, it's an easy shot. It should be. You have to give it the disc enough height. You got to clear like 250 feet of water or something. And then the basket's open, so it should be a birdie putt, at what is it, like 330, something like that?
I think it's like 320, yeah, somewhere around there.
It's for what we can throw, it's reasonable. And the rec tee pad is, once again, like you should be able to get that if you're a rec player. I think it's probably like a 200-foot throw or 150-foot throw, something like that. Anyway, I threw it low. I was throwing too hard, and I tried too hard. That's probably the long and short of it. And then I had this weird upshot from the bank of the pond and then gave myself a 20-foot putt and missed it. And we'll talk about it later because I think it just brought up this topic to me of like, how do you handle when your round starts off terribly? I think hole 2, I had a birdie putt on a pretty tough forehand line that I was pretty happy about having a putt, but I shorted it. And then, you just start out thinking like, oh, I should have really birdied 1. And then I had an opportunity to birdie 2 and I'm 1 over. And I think that between that and then kind of rushing because you're in a big group, I feel like threw off my round a bit. And there's no reason when you have that many players that you can't take your time. You just have to do it a little differently. But I feel like I didn't have as much fun as I should have had because I was annoyed at myself. And 2, I didn't play as well as I should have had because I was thinking about the round a bit. And then we've been talking about the last 2 weeks, how the last few rounds that David and I have played together, I've played better than I scored, or seemingly. And my round at Watson this week was exactly that. I scored even, and it's in a super easy layout. I feel like 5 down with no wind is like, for us, is like, oh yeah, that's fine. It's not great. And even, but it was like the funnest, dumbest even par round at Watson in easy positions I've ever played. I had like so many putts, especially circle 2 putts that were all over the basket but just didn't stay. I had an 8-foot putt that spit back. I missed the Mando on one of the easiest holes on hole 3 by like a foot. I was telling David over text, like I think I was 10 total feet away from being 10 down. It was just one of those rounds where I was like, hey, you know what? I had fun, even though this was stupid. But I feel really good about where my backhand is at. I'm starting to put less effort into the throw and getting similar or better results than when I throw too hard. And I'm starting to get consistent height at release or trajectory. And I think that's pretty encouraging.
That's awesome. I think both you and I are kind of in scramble mode this month to kind of get our form in check. So then, Josiah and I signed up for first tournament in March. Is it middle of March?
I think it's beginning, middle, somewhere in there.
I think because by the time March 1st hits, we don't want to be thinking about form or anything. We just want to be in cruise mode, being able to get ourselves ready for the tournament. Because I think that's one thing that you don't want to be thinking about during tournament season is making adjustments to your form, because that's when you fall apart.
Yeah, well, that's definitely been my life for sure. And, to be able to throw with a little less effort, or at least better mechanics, probably will prevent injuries, which I think is also ideal when you're heading into tournament season. I think we'll head straight into the how did you do that pro tip. World champion, 3-time major champion, Sarah Hokum, was so kind to reply back to me. And I asked her, Sarah, what's one thing you wish you would have known when you were first building your game? And she said, I wish I had known to limit the number of molds I was throwing and learn to manipulate the angles and power, rather than switching to a different mold to produce different shots. And I feel like this is kind of an interesting one for me, because I feel like there's kind of 2 camps that have arisen in disc golf. The camp of the Philo Brathaway, I think he carries like 5 molds. It's like AVR's rocks, Firebirds, Destroyers, T-Birds. So maybe that's 6. I don't know. And then you have other folks that are like, hey, I have, maybe I'm going to carry 15 molds. But I feel like, the specific, hey, early on limiting the molds makes a ton of sense. And I think that I have done a disservice to myself in my game by having a few too many molds in my bag when I'm practicing. And I think going back to last week where we were talking about throwing putters and mids, I think that's one thing that, I don't throw many Anheisers, but when I had a lot of putter and mid rounds, I was kind of forced to because I didn't have a good forehand disc for distance because I was throwing neutral putters and mids and don't have that good of a forehand, especially in the wind. And so I was having to learn to throw more Anheisers, and I feel like it's something I'm adding to my game is this like baby Anheuser where when you're learning, you're often taught like, hey, try to throw hyzer flips and hyzer, and because that's, a powerful angle and it's natural. And I think that's good. But I do think sometimes if you take that to the extreme and that's the only angle you throw and you force the shot by disc selection, you sometimes, if you just threw an Anheuser, our buddy Micah has the most beautiful baby Anheuser you'll ever see in an amateur. And just watching him throw, I'm like, he's making it so easy on this hole. And so anyway, enough about Anheisers, but just generally, what do you think about that tip, David?
I like it in the sense that, I kind of relate it to relationships because as we're getting to know our discs, you want to know what they do and how they work. If you're grabbing 12 discs to start off with and trying to learn them all, it's going to take you a long time to get to know what they're doing. Just in the same sense of you think about your community. If you have 20 friends versus 4 friends, if you have 4 friends, you're going to get to know them pretty well week in and week out. If you have 20 friends, it's going to be pretty dang hard to get to know them well. And so I kind of relate it to that in the sense of I want to know my disc really well. And I think one of the things earlier on, and one of the things I think I'm beginning to learn right now, because I feel like I'm going a lot back to the basics, especially with backhand, is being okay with having one of those understable discs that I'm bagging that I am going to and learning what I can do with it. Because I think understable discs, you can do a lot of different things with them that because of being so obsessed with overstable early on, I feel like it limited my growth early on. But I do feel like when it comes to having just very few molds in your bag, I have 3 different Firebirds, 5 different race. I definitely am within.
Yeah, you naturally are a mold minimalist, and if you lose a Firebird, you're not like, hey, I'm going to go pick up a Raptor and see what that's about. You're like, how can I find that disc again, and how can I beat it up to get it to where I want it to be again?
Exactly, and I think that just comes to that feeling of knowing your disc and what you can do with it. And I think, it that might limit my growth as far as a player at times, but I think it gives me a level of consistency as well.
I think about this all the time because I love trying new discs, and part of the reason to have disc reviews is so I can just selfishly throw new discs. But I think one thing I really admire about David, your game, is just you play within yourself and you're extremely consistent, and you're consistent about your disc selection. You keep things simple. And I think that is one of the reasons why you have much higher floors in tournaments than some, because you play within yourself.
For sure. I think that's something I kind of took from, I grew up playing baseball that we talked about in the first podcast. One thing that my hitting coach would really hammer home is knowing who you are and sticking within yourself. Because I think if you know who you are and you stick within yourself, then I think it was Kyle Klein's dad that told him going into the tournament for when he won the Amateur World Cup. Is it called World Cup? Amateur World Championship, National Championships. There we go. Don't throw a hard shot, or stay away from throwing hard shots, or keep your shots easy. I forgot what it was. But basically sticking to what you know.
That was such a good quote. You nailed it.
I know. Sticking at the bottom line, sticking to what you know. And I think if you can simplify your game and understand your game, which I think Sarah Hokum's quote kind of brings it down to, is understanding what you have and what you can do with it. Just being able to simplify can definitely give you some advantages in playing.
I totally agree. And I think that that's one place that I sometimes sacrifice my scoring potential and consistency for the fun of trying new discs. And so I want to have some balance between, hey, this disc actually can help me, versus I'm just kind of bored and can't help but think about disc golf. And I'm like, hey, if I could just get this slightly less stable buzz mold, so an M4 or something, and then I could throw that from a hyzer. And when in reality, most times a disc is not going to really change your game, especially once you have kind of a complete bag. But to go with your community metaphor, simile, whatever it is, I think it's important to have those 4 close friends, and then, not be totally shut off from like, hey, this other person wants to be my friend. Maybe you're introverted, so you want to keep that circle tight. That's totally fine. But I do think sometimes trying new disc is A, fun. It B, can kind of reignite some, passion for the game, just because it's fun to watch new plastic fly. And I think there is some balance between those two extremes.
Yeah, for sure. I agree with you. And we can get into more of that when we review the Crave that we're going to talk about, because that's definitely a new disc for me.
Yeah, I'm excited to hear what you thought about it. I purposefully didn't let you tell me too much about your thoughts. So we will talk about that. I wanted to talk to you. We talked about, especially Palisade, how that first bogey, I think, kind of threw off both of our rounds. And I wanted to talk to you a bit about, hey, how do you handle a round that starts poorly? Whether that's a solo round with friends, a tournament round, because I do think that, a lot of rounds start off, if I start off well, I'll shoot well. Like, hey, if I start off, 3 down through 4, 2 down through 4 at Watson, like I'll probably shoot pretty well overall, just because I'm having a great round. Unless I get in my head because I'm 8 down through 9 or 6 down through 10 or whatever that is. I'm not normally 8 down through 9. That would have been a really sick start. But so just wanted to get your thoughts, David, and just kind of talk to you about, hey, what do you do when you have that, and what do you wish you would do, or what do you think is best given a slow start?
No, I think that's a great question, and I think that changes depending on if it's just a fun round with friends or if it's a tournament round. I think if it's a fun round with friends, always going into a round, my goal for the round is to get my best score that I have gotten on that course. That typically is my goal going into the round. If I start off poorly, if I bogey hole 1, and I think I might have bogeyed hole 2, I can't remember. And both those are very gettable birdies, especially for a four-handed shot. When that happens, typically my goal goes from going for my best round to be like, okay, kind of laughing that off and saying, okay, this is a learning round for me. Whether I want to practice on some of my backhand or whatever it might be, I think I changed my goal for the round. And so I'm not going into the round trying to, I guess I'm resetting myself at hole 3, thinking, okay, I want to learn something, whether it's focusing on my jump putts this round, if my drives are so terrible, if I'm having to work on my scrambling, whatever it might be. I think I'm just changing my goal. But if it's a tournament play, that's entirely different, because I think it's really aggravating and frustrating when you go into a round. You think, okay, I'm on the lead card or I'm on the chase card, and it's round 2, round 3, whatever it might be for the final round, and you start off bogey to start off with. It's easy to get frustrated, and especially, that's a whole nother variable with different card mates that you're not used to playing with, because you don't want to be the guy on the card that's expressing extreme frustration.
The sad one.
That sad one. And so it's balancing those. And I think for me, one thing that I pride myself on, especially in tournaments, that you have to let go of those moments and know that, okay, that hole is over with. That shot is over with, so there's no reason to think about it anymore. I'm going into this next hole. This next hole is very gettable for a birdie for me. I'm going to focus on my drive, and if I get up there and have a chance for birdie, I'm sticking within my game. I'm not trying to. And so I think it's really just being able to, in a tournament, being able to let those moments go. So I'm not necessarily changing my goal. My goal is to get my best round on that course. But definitely reorienting, being able to just let it go. It's really not that big of a deal.
Yeah, I think that's really great. I have a confession to make, David. So David and I, when he started getting good, and I was already, really good. So maybe we should say this. When he started getting okay and I was already okay at disc golf, we started to have an arms race. Our closest course or our most played course is Watson Island. And we were kind of an arms race for personal records on the course. So I think I was at something like a 5 or a 6 as my personal record. And well, when I was doing this, I was playing by myself most of the time. I'd have my son with me a lot of times. And I was like, hey, I got to beat David's score. I got to get the next personal record. And so I would play like 3 or 4 holes. And if I wasn't like under par, I would start over. I would be like, no, this isn't going to do it. I'd literally start over and just be like, I'm going to try this again. And my poor, 2-year-old at the time was just being dragged around the stroller. It should finish a round at Watson by yourself in like an hour and a half. I'd be out there for like 2 hours just trying to get that first start so I could beat your lowest score or my most recent lowest score.
That sounds about right. I ended up playing with my brother around yesterday, and we got through hole 3, and I think I was -1, and he had a rough the first 3 holes. I think he was at +1 or something. And I looked and I was like, are you sure you don't want to start over? I feel like we could start over because I'd really like to beat Josiah's score today.
That's so funny.
He didn't let me start over.
Yeah, well, my top 4 or 5 best scores did not include a restart, just to be totally fair. And I think when I went 7 down, I started off +1 over the first 4 holes. And I was like, you know what? I can't live in a world where I'm hoping to learn how to recover from starting poorly. If my thought is, if it's not good, I'm just going to scrap it and start over. And I think that, that's kind of my mentality now. I recently beat David's 13 down with a 14 down. That was like 2 months ago, but I just want to, humble brag.
It was aggravating because it was December. So technically, I think it was last December that you took the record too. So that's
last December was my 12 down.
Both years, the very end of the year, you take my record.
But I scored like in the next week. I also scored an 11 down and a 12 down. And I'm actually most proud of my 11 down because I had a double bogey on like the 7th hole. I was like having a good round, then I had a double bogey, and then I went like 9 straight birdies. And it's a pretty easy layout. So it's not that impressive, but it was one of these things where I was like, hey, this actually, to me, the 14 down with no bogeys is, for me, less impressive than, hey, I got a double bogey on it's not an easy hole, but a hole that we should all par. And so to play well through a little bit of adversity, I feel like it was encouraging to me.
That's awesome. We're kind of going back to talking about the round starting poorly. I don't know. That's one thing in a tournament I was trying to relate. I've never actually experienced a round starting off super poorly because I think in a tournament, my goal is to go for par. I think I've started off a hole with a bad drive, and that was the very first tournament that we had.
Would you like me to tell a story then?
Yeah,
since you've never experienced it.
You should tell a story since I've never experienced this. Watch now, our first tournament in Palisade, I'm going to experience this.
It'll be good for you. You'll still probably, be fine. I played a tournament. It was like 400-foot hole. It's got OB left and right with a river right, but it's a fairly straightforward hole to par. You just need to throw a straight shot and then lay up and make your putt. And I threw this like great, nice straight drive, laid up to 8 feet of the basket, and then I literally, because everybody was finishing their putts at the same time, I just flung it, and it bounced out. And so I started with a bogey on like the perfect play. Like I got my drive in bounds. I had a great upshot. I had an 8-footer, like 100% shot for me, and I missed it. And I told myself, like, hey, get out of your head. But I think that it was so hard for me to let that go because it was an easy mistake in something that you should never miss an 8-foot putt. It doesn't matter if you're 90 and you're just figuring out the sport. Like, anybody can make an 8-foot putt. I think my 3-year-old will make most of his 8-foot putts. So I was so annoyed, and I think I scored like 10 or 12 over that round. And the second round, I think I went like 2 over. So it was clearly not like, oh, it was just such a hard round or course or whatever. It was just, I think I got in my head. And so I am really working on staying loose and having fun. And also, I think Nate Perkins talks about this sometimes, but not not writing the story of your round in terms of, hey, this is what's going on, and so this is the story of my round. I'm not playing that well, that sort of thing. It's like, no, just focus on the next shot. Like you're talking about, David. That's one thing I'm really working on is, no, it's over. It happened. I've accepted it, and I'm moving on. And then every shot is its own story, and that story is accepted and moved on from, whether it's good or bad, whether it's an ace or an early OB or anything like that. And I don't mean to monologue, but you were caddying for me Watson at Colorado State's, and my very first throw on the first round was a forehand smashed into the first available, and it was a terrible throw because you shouldn't hit those early trees. And I was under a tree like 300 feet away. There's OB left and deep of the basket position, and I'm forced to throw this kind of like standstill low flexi Anheuser forehand in order to give myself a chance at par, which is not my strength. And I gave myself a 25 foot putt and then nailed it. And I feel like that for me, even though that whole tournament wasn't incredible, I feel like it was like, hey, I'm more proud of that than if I would have parked that very hard hole to begin with, just because it was like, no, I persevered and I let the nerves get to me, but then I didn't let them take the hole or the round.
Yeah, I feel like that just helped you reset, and you just cruised through the front nine. I think you didn't really make a mistake on that front nine. It was just the back nine. You started to make a couple of mistakes in that round. So
we won't mention the double bogey on 3 then.
Josiah had a chance. He was chasing down the leader on that, and I was excited. And then it was towards the end. I think he had a couple of mistakes that kind of hurt him. But I was gonna go back to in our tournament in Frisco last year, I didn't necessarily start off my round poorly, but my first round was on a card with 2 guys that were significantly above my level of play, of what I would consider my skill level. I kind of view myself in the advanced category. Like there's the top echelon in the advanced, and then I'm just beneath the top echelon. I'm not in that top 10.
He's a demigod.
Yeah, I'm not in that top, I guess, 5%. I might be in the top 8 to 15%, somewhere in there. So there's 2 guys on my cards. One guy's throwing 450-foot thumbers, and the other guy has probably around 400 foot of power with insane control through.
Only
with a
in Colorado will you end up in a card in advance that someone's throwing 450 foot thumbers.
Yeah. But
shout out to JC Kester, the greatest thrower alive, who's a Valley local.
But so I didn't necessarily start off my round poorly. I think through 5 holes, I was sitting -1 or -2. But these guys had birdied everything, and they were just crushing. And so it was kind of disheartening for me, feeling like I'm used to being one of the leaders on the card. I felt like I was getting destroyed, and I had no chance of catching up because I didn't have the skill set that these guys did, and they also knew the course better than I did. And so definitely I feel like that was the most frustrating tournament for me, because I felt like I was just playing catch up, and I wasn't really playing my game necessarily because I was so awestruck or caught up in what these guys were doing. That is hard to really focus on my game. So I think that's one, talking about starting off a round poorly. Not necessarily a poor round, but I felt really poor about myself because I couldn't catch up to these guys. And that's one thing that I need to figure out, like what to do when it comes to being on a card with guys that seemingly the skill set is better than mine. I mean, one thing is, I think Josiah talked about on the podcast last week is we talked earlier about sticking within your game and knowing yourself. But that was the first time that I encountered that on a card, and it's really aggravating for me. And I kind of fell apart. I think I ended up shooting -1, so it wasn't a terrible round. But I didn't feel good about myself because I think the leader he ended up winning the tournament. I think he shot 15 down, and then the other guy on the card shot 13 or 12 down, and sitting -1. You don't feel good about yourself when you're losing by 13, 11 strokes.
To be fair, though, you had kind of already written the narrative of the tournament when we played our practice round, because between being up at like 9,000 feet elevation and the course being a different feel than the courses that you just normally play really well at, I feel like you had already lost the tournament before you even stepped onto the first tee pad. No offense, but it just felt that way.
For sure. And those guys just kind of buried the grave that I'd already dug.
Well, it's good for you to get a little humbled occasionally, since you're usually kicking my butt in most tournaments.
Yeah, for sure. I think you beat me in that tournament, right? Because that second round, it just got crazy windy and rainy. And I think the last 6-7 holes, it was just dumping rain on us. And so all of us are just throwing to try to get out of there.
I think I did. I think the last 5 holes, I had really torn up my arm. I think I just pulled a muscle or something. I had been throwing a lot of forehands, and I don't practice that many. And so I think I beat you, but I think I was playing pretty well up until those last few holes. And then I kind of fell apart just because I couldn't throw without a ton of pain. I couldn't really putt without a ton of pain, but I didn't want to drop out. Anyway, that's not really about starting off poorly. That's just about finishing poorly, but there's an injury. So anyway, I think that's good stuff. And I just encourage you, disc golf, as we've talked about, should be fun. And so if you're playing poorly, it doesn't help to just berate yourself and, I should have, you're the worst. Yeah, I'm a piece of trash, whatever. It's like, no, you get to have fun on the next shot. And the next shot, I honestly think scramble shots are super fun. And if you can just tell yourself, oh, I ended up in this terrible lie. It's like, hey, I can throw something cool from this lie, or I can lay up and play smart and take my bogey and move on to the next hole knowing I did my best. And so I think part of it is also just readjusting your attitude to what is fun. And what could be fun is you were 2 over through the first 2 holes, and you end up, pulling to par after 9, or you were 5 over through 9, and you were able to, maintain that 5 over, and you didn't let it totally ruin your round or your tournament. And this can be with friends as well. You should have fun every time you play disc golf. If we love working on our games, but if you're so obsessed with your personal record or playing really well that you don't have fun on a pretty day when you're hanging out with your friends, you're doing it wrong. And I'm saying that with some vehemence because I'm telling myself that, because I didn't have as much fun at Palisade on Saturday as I should have.
Yeah, I think practicing laughing at the mistakes. Because I think early on when we were playing disc golf, especially at the beginning of the round, probably a year and a half ago, I would get so frustrated and almost throw tantrums out there on the course. And
you would leave after 9 holes sometimes if you lost a couple discs or something.
Yeah, get to the point where your friends, it's no fun for your friends because they feel like they can't interact with you. I think realizing how I was impacting my community based off my behavior, because then how prideful is that? Expecting myself to be so good that when I make a mistake, I'm aggravated. I'm an amateur. Even pros make mistakes, and why am I so obsessed with that? And so I think for me, learning to laugh when making a mistake, really it's not that big of a deal. Or you get a spit out from the basket, just laughing of course, it's funny. That's part of the game. And I think just being able to laugh in those moments and appreciate it for what it is makes you realize it's really not that big of a deal. And it also lightens the mood for your friends.
Yeah, for sure. And I think, the round I played at Watson earlier that we talked about, I had the most fun I've had playing poorly. And that in and of itself, I felt like that's good for my game. Because if you can do that and you don't carry this, pressure or burden of playing poorly, you're going to play better either that round or the next round or the next tournament. And when you start writing that story of I'm playing poorly, my form is trash, I can't putt, you aren't going to play better because of that. That's not going to help you. What's going to help you is to say, oh, that was dumb, and now it's over. And I already got that bad shot out of the way. I got that bad putt out of the way. I'm a good putter. I'm going to make the next one.
For sure. I think it's also more approachable for your friends or community that might be just getting into disc golf, because I think if you're complaining about just a slight miss or missing the basket, and then a friend is taking 5 shots to get into the basket, I think it's kind of just insulting to...
It is really annoying.
It's just rude and annoying. And so I think just being able to laugh it off just improves the fun for everybody. Because it's really just about having fun and being able to laugh. You can take that into life as well. And that's the beautiful thing about sports, is it's a direct translation and application to your daily life.
Yeah, I totally agree. Well, should we get into the disc review?
Let's do it.
All right. So for our What Was That disc review, we have the Axiom Crave, which is a 6.5 speed. You heard that right. Half a speed. 6.5 speed, 5 glide, -1 turn, and 1 fade fairway driver. And David, I'm super curious. What do you think of the Crave?
let's see, I think you described this to me as a slightly faster buzz, and I would agree on that. The grip feel was nice. I think the most similar thing that I have thrown before is a Leopard or Leopard 3. And as far as the grip feel, I felt like the grip feel on this particular disc, the Crave, felt nicer. I think the Leopard might be a little bit like wider, not wider,
a little deeper.
Thicker, deeper. That's the right word I'm looking for. And I just really like the grip feel. And I think one thing I talked about in the second cup is I was working on a different hand grip, and it's one that I felt like with that different hand grip, I can really get a good feel for it. And I was beginning to get some solid control with it. One thing that I liked is it's a straight shooter, just like the Buzz. I've been really having trouble with I throw the T-Bird 3 a lot, and I also have a Saint that I bag and for backhand. And those are probably the most neutral discs and they're still slightly overstable.
I feel like the Saint is, would you say it's just because it's faster, it's more stable?
Yeah, I'd say just because it's faster. I definitely end up getting that to hyzer out every once in a while. But the beautiful thing about this particular disc is, I think, going back to talking about mid-ranges and throwing mid-ranges and putters, this is maybe slightly over a mid-range. I think it's considered a fairway driver. It has the same feel because if you're ripping on it too hard, you're going to turn it over. If it definitely favors having a clean release point, which I'm trying to work on it, so I really liked. And I was definitely getting it to throw straight, and I love that it just sticks on whatever line you're throwing. I think it was hole 15. Is that hanging basket?
Yeah, I think 16 is hanging basket.
Okay, 16. I did this just to try it out to see if it hold the line through this crazy Anheuser line, and it held the line perfectly. And I threw it around the tree, and it landed. So sometimes it's in its par 4 location. It landed in the perfect spot for a shot to throw it up the gut for its par 4 location. So it's just a fun shot. And so I like it in the sense that whatever line you put it on, similar to the Buzz, it seems like it's going to hold that line. And I think I was throwing it on average around like 300 feet. I think when I tried a little hyzer flip because I was texting Josiah with it. And I was like, hey, how do you get the most distance out of this thing? Because you can't rip on it. And I'm not the best at hyzer flips, but I did get it to hyzer flip one time, and I got about 320 with it, which I felt pretty good about. I think that's, for me, with a fairway driver, if I'm getting that and I can throw it straight, I think it's a reliable disc. If I'm wanting to hit just a straight shot through a tunnel of trees, it's definitely a disc that I can see myself going to or thinking about.
Yeah, I feel like I'll have to ask you which ones you liked the best because you threw 4 of them, but I think that it's a lot like a Buzz from a baby hyzer. So I think a Crave is a little less stable than a Buzz when thrown with power, but I think if you throw it from a baby hyzer, I feel like you have a very similar flight. You're going to have maybe a tiny bit more fade with the Crave, and it's not going to have quite as much integrity on the early flight, but if you put it on that baby hyzer, I feel like you get a very similar flight, just maybe 20 or 30 feet longer.
For sure.
One thing about the Crave, and this is true of all Axiom and MVP discs, is they have this overmold technology. The rim is broken up into really 2 pieces. And what they do is they have a higher density plastic on the outside, so there's more weight on the outside of the disc. And the idea is that because you have more weight on the outside of the rim, you have more momentum because of the gyroscopic effect. I think that I've been throwing a little bit more Axiom MVP, as we talked about on the first episode lately, and I do think there's something to it. I think that there is just the slightest, you can feel the transition between the 2 different pieces, the outer mold and the inner mold, and I'm wondering, David, did that bother you at all? Did you notice it?
I actually didn't notice it at all. I mean, obviously, visually, you can see the difference, but as far as grip feel and hand feel, no, it didn't make any difference for me.
My sense was that they fade harder but later, so you actually end up with less total travel on the left, but you have this little reliable fade. And I think that's true about the Crave. You don't have very much fade at all early on, and then you have this kind of like very reliable, just tiny little fade at the end. The flight numbers, I do think that -1.1 is pretty true. You threw a beat up Proton, which is their clearish plastic, beat up Neutron or slightly beat up Neutron, the Sarah Hokum signature disc. So we're doubling up on our Hokum. We had her pro tip and her signature disc. So you beat up a fresh and a beat up Proton, which is kind of like their champion plastic for those Innova fans, and then a fresh and a beat up Neutron, which is kind of like their star plastic. What do you think about the plastics, and what do you think about the flights? Which one did you like the most?
I think they all were comparable to each other. I think the one that I enjoyed throwing the most was probably the Sarah Hokum, and you said there was the Neutron, right?
Yep.
And the Neutron plastic. And I think partially because when I did the distance, doing the slight hyzer flip, that was with one of those discs that I got 320 out of it. And I think in general, I enjoy whether it's the ESP plastic, star plastic, Neutron plastic. That's typically plastic that I just enjoy the grip feel on it for some reason. Yeah, I felt like I had really good control and I could put it on I enjoyed all of them, but in particular those ones, whatever line I'm putting them on, it seemed like I can hold it. That's something that I don't really have in my bag, a straight shooter that I can hit over 300 feet. I can't throw my buzz. I mean, maybe I can hit my buzz right around the 300-foot range on a good clean shot.
I bet you could. I just don't know how much control or, how much of a risk it is for you to try too hard.
Yep, for sure. And so this definitely this is something in my bag that I'm definitely would be considered possibly missing because I don't have a shot that really necessarily fits within that line. The closest would either be the Buzz or the Saint that I have in my bag.
Yeah, can you compare this, because you have basically Buzz, T-Bird 3, like a beat up T-Bird 3 and a Saint. Where does this fall compared to those? You said it's not that similar to any of those, but
yeah, I think it falls right in the middle of the Buzz and the Saint. I think I'm getting a little bit more distance with the similar fight pattern as the Buzz, being able to put it on the line. I can throw a Buzz dead straight. I can throw this guy dead straight. With the Saint, I'm getting a little bit more finish typically on it, and I might even get a slight skip with the Saint. This just got me thinking, like, if I'm playing it through a tunnel of trees and I needed to hit a direct line, this is one that you can throw it through a tunnel of trees with a clean release point, and it's going to finish somewhere where that line ends. It's not going to have a massive fade at the end, right? And it's not going to skip super far away from the basket. I think this is a disc that James Conrad uses, right?
I think he has used it. I don't know if it's something that is in his bag currently. There's a Relay, which is a hair slower and a hair more flippy, that I think he uses for his flippy shots. And then I think he uses a Volt, which is more stable and a little faster. I don't know that Conrad currently bags a Crave, which is, yeah, shame.
It seems like a disc that he would throw. Just with his control through trees. I mean, he can use a putter for anything. But with his control through trees, it just seems like this is a disc that he can put on whatever line he wants, and it's going to end up wherever he wants it without too much fade at the end. Yeah,
no, I hear that. James, since you're listening, it's not if you're listening anymore, it's since you're listening, you should give the Crave a second try. It's a beautiful disc. One thing I wanted to just talk about is the flights with the different plastics, and I've only thrown Proton and Neutron, so I haven't messed with Plasma or any of the other plastics, but I'd say that there's not as much variation as you would find with other brands. I have some like old patent pending, no flight number Craves, Proton that are a little bit more stable than Neutron, and I've got some of the Hokums that maybe, depending on which one you have, maybe a hair less stable. But I think in general, you get a really straight flyer. And depending on your power, that might be a straight flyer from just a flat release or a little bit of hyzer. But you do get a reliable straight flyer. David, what do you think? Who is this disc good for? What kind of player could benefit from this disc?
I mean, I think for sure a beginner, this is a great disc to pick up. If you're wanting to find that clean release point, and going back to talking about Sarah Hokum's quote, clean release point and being able to do different things with the disc. This is a great disc to start off with. I think you can definitely possibly see this in some pro bags, amateur bags. I think definitely when I think about this disc, amateurs and beginners for sure. I think this is hands down a good place to start, and it might be a good place to finish because you fall in love with it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And the one thing we were talking about last week, hey, throw more putters and mids. one issue with that would be that I don't think putters and mids teach you enough about nose angle, particularly to throw nose down. I think that that's the one downside of throwing mostly putters and mids is you can actually get sometimes more distance by having nose up. And I think nose up is useful and helpful for certain discs and for certain shots. But in terms of distance with throwing drivers, fairway control distance drivers, if you don't have that nose down, you're going to see a flight that rises the whole way and then kind of stalls and fades hard left. That's like the typical amateur throw. And it's honestly a pro shot as well. Like that stall hyzer is very useful. But if you're trying to get distance, if you're trying to get that straight shot with a fairway, it can be super frustrating. So I do think if you're going to add, hey, throw putters and mids, I'd say throw neutral to understable fairways so you can learn that nose angle a little bit more. And I think if you had a starter pack and it included a Crave and a Buzz and like a neutral putter, I think that you would be, if you're buying one for a friend, I think you'd be giving them discs that they could enjoy and learn from as a beginner, and could still be staples in their bags when they eventually get better than you and go on tour.
For sure. I also think this is a great disc for women to start off with. My wife tried throwing it a few times. She really liked the grip feel on it, and she felt like she was getting some good snap on it.
Yeah, I think it's a great disc. And you're obviously, if you're throwing 200, it's still going to feel pretty stable for you. But I think it's a great disc to teach control. And they go far for a 6.5 or a 7 speed. But I think it's a great disc to teach control. I think we're ready for your rating, David. So our rating system is 1 through 5. David and I will sum our scores out of 10. 1 is this disc just isn't that great. 2 is it's a fine disc, but there are definitely better options. 3 is it's a good disc, but it doesn't stand out. 4 is it's not going in my bag, but it's fantastic. And 5 is it's definitely going in my bag. So David, you got a rating for the Crave?
For sure. I think I'm going to go with a 4 on this one. It's not necessarily going in my bag. It might be something I should consider going in my bag. And I think it's a great disc. I think, you can do a lot of things with it. For me, it's hard to commit to putting something in my bag because it's like I'm building a whole new relationship. I'm inviting something else into my life.
You and your metaphors.
Yeah, love the disc. I feel like it's a great one to, especially if you're doing field work, if you're playing a shorter course and wanting to work on those backhanded lines. It's a great disc to work with. And it is a great disc to consider having in your bag. But I think at this time, I probably won't have it in my bag unless I think part of that is because we don't have a whole lot of courses in the Valley that have those tunnel shots. I think if I was playing more courses that I was having to hit those lines, going back on the first podcast we talked about, I did a trip down to Austin, Texas to play some rounds at Roy Guerrero and Met Center. And there you're having to throw through trees on some pretty tight lines. And I think there I probably would consider throwing it. But here in the Valley, it's not necessarily something I need, maybe on 1 or 2 holes in the Valley. And I could come up with a different shot for right now.
I can't believe you, David. You're like, I have this hole in my bag. This fits that hole perfectly. I'm not putting it in. I have to give it a 5. I love the Crave. I threw FDs for a while by Discmania, and they have similar flight numbers, but to me, I like how flat the Crave is. I like the feel of it better, and I feel like they're hair less stable than an FD, so I can get a little bit more of a flip up, and with my natural slight hyzer game, they are great. I like throwing dead straight from a slight hyzer. That's my play as often as possible, even though it's not necessary where we play. I like going straight at the basket. It's just how I play. And so I think the Crave gives me that shot very reliably, and it's very versatile. I can put it on a little ante, get it to hold that, or I can put it on a bigger ante. I can throw a hyzer with it and have it hold that hyzer. It has a little bit of flip, so I can do a flip up hyzer. I feel like it's super versatile, and it's become kind of a core of my bag. I'll usually carry 1 or 2 Craves, and then Axiom and MVP have a lineup of 6.5, 7 speeds, and so I end up putting some of those in my bags for pretty much any round. So it's a 5 for me, a 4 for David, so that's 9 out of 10. That's a solid score, and we are getting away from discs that we both bag for most of our reviews, so those scores will drop, but that doesn't mean it's not a fantastic disc that you should try. This week, we're going to be giving away not one, but two Craves that should pair nicely. A Sarah Hokum Signature Series Neutron Crave and a pre-flight number patent pending Proton Crave. Yes, that is some serious alliteration. You can enter by following us on Instagram at thegrind.dg and looking for the post for this show. Anyway, David, that's the majority of our podcast, but I thought it'd be fun. I'd ask, what's more fun for you? Disc golf is supposed to be fun. So what's more fun for you? Banging a long circle 2 putt or just puring a tough drive?
Oh, man, I'd have to go with the putt. I think whether it's recovering, saving your par, nailing a long birdie, I think the excitement of that for me definitely outweighs. I mean, I love hitting a tough drive, but at the end of the day, I think if there was one that would give me the most excitement, like I talked about earlier in the podcast, lining up that jump putt in the wind. I was so pumped about that, and I could have a terrible round that day, but the fact that I hit that felt really good.
Yeah, this is a hard one for me because I think I don't really hit too many C2 putts, and I think that a lot of times when I do, I'm like, oh, that went in, oops, not like, oh, I knew I was going to make it the whole time. I'm still working on that, but I love the feeling of just hitting a really tough drive, especially if it's through a narrow gap and you have the disc do exactly what you were hoping for the full flight. For me, it would be like a little flip up, a little turn, and a baby fade to under the basket. I think that to me, over hitting a circle 2 putt feels more intentional and a little less lucky. And so for me, I'm going to have to go with puring a drive, but either one's super fun.
That's awesome.
That's all that we have for you in this week's episode. Big thank you to Antonio for being our very first Patreon patron. We really appreciate you, and it's super encouraging for us as we're building content to have you along for the ride. If you'd like to become a Patreon, you can visit patreon.com/thegrinddg and learn all about that. Thank you to Sarah Hokum for providing the pro tip, and thank you so much to Vanessa for sending the coffee, and thank you to Birdie Fuel. You can support Vanessa and Birdie Fuel by ordering her coffee at birdiefuelcoffee.com. Have a great week, and don't forget, whether it's disc golf or coffee, to enjoy the grind.